Coming up, South Korea transitions to a post-pandemic life, lifting nearly all anti-COVID-19 measures. Business curfews, social distancing, and restrictions on cultural events and religious services effectively end on Monday. Masks, though, are staying on. Mariupol has not fallen. Kyiv says its fighters continue to defy Moscow's demands to surrender in the southern port city. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says his troops will stand their ground and are prepared to fight Russian forces in the Donbas region. A show of strength and deterrence. Seoul and Washington kick off their joint springtime military drills for a 9-day run starting Monday. This comes after North Korea claims to have tested a new weapon system to improve its tactical nukes.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's April 18th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea, and I'm Lee Seung-jae.
I'm Oh Soo-young, and over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Starting from Monday, social distancing rules in South Korea will finally be lifted after more than 2 years.
That's right, and that means there'll no longer be restrictions on business hours or the number of people who can gather at once. For this, Kim Hyun-sung with the details.
The social distancing rules that have been in place for the past 2 years are finally coming to an end. Starting from Monday, South Korea will lift almost all its social distancing measures. The anti-COVID measures first went into effect on March 2020. And since then, the health authorities have attempted to contain the spread of COVID-19 by repeatedly tightening and easing these rules. But no longer. Now businesses will be able to stay open all night, and there will be no more limit to the number of people who can gather together. Events and rallies will no longer be limited to under 300 people. Religious services and events can be held at full capacity. But for eating in indoor stadiums and theaters, health authorities need another week of preparation. This ban on eating will be lifted next Monday. And masks are staying on for at least another 2 weeks, both indoors and outdoors. Health authorities will circle back to this issue in a fortnight to discuss whether to lift the mask mandate. The lifting of social distancing measures comes on the back of declining COVID infections. South Korea last week saw an average of more than 130,000 COVID infections per day. That's a 33% drop from the week before, when the country saw more than 200,000 cases a day on average. The self-isolation rules for infected patients will remain for now, but will also be lifted gradually over the next several weeks. And patients will soon be able to visit their local doctor to get COVID-19 treatments, like they do for the common flu. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Starting from the end of April, COVID-19 will be downgraded from the top category of infectious diseases in the country. This means that those who are infected will no longer have to stay at home for 7 days. There'll be a lot of other changes too in the way that the virus is dealt with, and our Peunji has the details.
Starting late May, people who test positive for COVID-19 in South Korea will no longer have to go through the week-long mandatory quarantine. They will be also able to receive treatment at local clinics and hospitals, just like any other disease. This also means that the country will no longer cover the medical costs in full for COVID-19 patients.
The 7-day mandatory quarantine will be lifted, and the requirement for at-home recovery will also be removed. Medical costs will be covered by the National Health Insurance Program, and patients will be responsible for paying them. But non-face-to-face treatment services will still be in place for those in need.
This is because COVID-19 will no longer be categorized as a level 1 infectious disease. Starting April 25th, it'll be downgraded to level 2. Then, after about a month-long transition period, South Koreans will slowly be able to go back to normal. Also, starting June, travelers entering South Korea will only need to get a PCR once, on the first day of their arrival. This will also apply to those who are not vaccinated. But travelers will still need to have a negative PCR test within 48 hours before departure. Right now, overseas travelers have to take a PCR test on the day of their arrival and then also take a rapid antigen test about a week after they have entered Korea. 배은지, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea says it has successfully test-fired a new tactical guided weapon in a launch overseen personally by the regime leader Kim Jong-un. That it took place Saturday evening, after which South Korea convened its National Security Council. Han Sung-woo has the details.
Pyongyang state media has announced that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was on site for what it claims was a successful test launch of a new tactical guided weapon aimed at reinforcing its, quote, tactical nuclear operations. The regime did not reveal the date of the launch, but South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said on Sunday that 2 projectiles were fired on Saturday at around 6 p.m. towards the East Sea from an area near the port city of Hamhung. They reportedly flew roughly 110 kilometers at an altitude of 25 kilometers and a top speed of Mach 4 or under. It's unusual for South Korea to report such a launch a day after the fact, but the Joint Chiefs said they're keeping close tabs on the situation in cooperation with the United States. Saturday evening, a top official at the National Security Council convened an emergency meeting with several officials, which was followed Sunday morning by a full session of the NSC. And according to the Blue House, President Moon Jae-in has instructed related ministries to closely monitor the situation. South Korean analysts believe North Korea may have tested a new heavy artillery system or an upgraded KN-23 missile, its own version of the U.S. Army tactical missile system. This is the regime's 13th known test firing of projectiles this year, and is the first since Pyongyang last month fired an intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time in more than 4 years. It comes as South Korea and the U.S. gear up for their combined springtime military training set to begin on Monday. On Friday, the North commemorated the 110th anniversary of the birth of its founder, Kim Il-sung, with fireworks and a mass performance in Pyongyang. But there have been no reports of a military parade like the ones the regime often puts on for important occasions. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Seoul and Washington will kick off their annual combined springtime military drills on Monday. South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff explained Sunday that the 9-day exercise will be held taking into account factors such as the COVID-19 situation as well as their combined readiness posture. It added that field troop maneuvers would not be included in the planned training aimed at enhancing the combined operational capabilities of the two allies. The computer-simulated combined command post training will run through April 28th. Meanwhile, the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Sung Kim, is slated to visit Seoul on Monday for talks. He will meet with Seoul's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, No Gyu-duk, as well as other senior officials to discuss the situation on the peninsula. Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight. Now, South Korea has lifted all COVID-19 restrictions aside from the mask mandates as the peak of the Omicron wave now appears to be behind us.
That's right. And however, the country is still seeing relatively high daily figures. So is it too early to lift these measures, or can we safely begin transitioning into our living with COVID-19 phase? Now, for this, we are connecting with Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Mary Women's Hospital. And good morning to you, Dr. Tan.
Good morning.
Now, first and foremost, I guess the most important question right now is we are seeing a number go down right now dramatically compared to some of the figures that we've seen at the height of the Omicron wave. How do you assess the situation right now? Are we finally at a point where we can clearly say the worst is behind us?
Well, if we look at what happened in the UK, they definitely had what they're calling twin peaks of their Omicron wave. So they had a second surge after the first, and the second was due to the BA2 subvariant. Here in South Korea, the BA.2 subvariant made up 41% of all sequenced cases 4 weeks ago. And the most recent figures show that it's making up 85% of our sequenced cases. And so even though the BA.2 is now definitely dominant, we have not seen over the last 4 weeks an increase in cases. Of course, the cases have been steadily decreasing. So I think that we are safe from a second BA.2 wave. However, there are two big questions. The first is, will the lifting of social distancing measures cause a second surge? And then, of course, will we be able to detect a second surge early enough? Because, of course, our testing is now going to be limited. We have 33 million people, that's 64% of our population, who's received up to a third dose, and 16.3 million people were recently infected, probably with the Omicron variant. So I think the pool of people who are open to infection in the near term is definitely much smaller, but we do have to take into account that protection from the third doses is now waning. And so there is the possibility that we may have a second wave. I don't think it'll be as large as the first wave, but this is something that we need to look out for.
And Dr. Tan, I wonder what you make of the easing of restrictions, which begins on Monday. I mean, some are concerned that it might be a bit premature, given that there's a triple-digit death toll that we're seeing on a daily basis.
Right. So when we make a decision about lifting social distancing measures, we have to take into account the rate of hospitalizations related to the occupancy of ICUs and sub-ICUs. And we also have to take into account, of course, the transmission levels. Right now, the transmission level in our country is 270 per 100,000 population, which, according to the U.S. CDC guidelines, is not a low level of transmission. However, in terms of occupancy of ICUs and sub-ICUs, they're both below 50%. And so I think in the near term, if we do experience a second surge after our first big Omicron surge, we will be able to absorb the patients that get infected. The question, of course, is, will we be able to monitor for a second surge, as I said, because testing is no longer, in terms of free testing, is not as widespread. And so we may be missing a second surge that happens.
It's one of those things where we want to stay positive now that we have some of these measures lifted, but still there are a couple of things that still linger in my mind, and I'm sure with a lot of the citizens as well. One being, of course, the XE variant that's been popping up, the other being the XL variant. Are these going to be a big concern moving forward? Because, I mean, at least according to some of the reports that are coming out right now, it's not something that we should be too worried about.
I agree with you. So if we look at the statistics from the UK, both the XE and the XL variants really didn't do much in terms of causing large numbers of cases. And so I think we don't need to worry too much about these two recombinant variants. I'm actually more concerned about BA.4 and BA.5 subvariants of Omicron, because they both contain a certain mutation which may make them more transmissible. And so we are waiting for more information out of South Africa. They're looking into this. Also, the UK, they're looking into this. And so this is the reason why we need to continue with high levels of genetic surveillance in our country. We don't have any BA.4, BA.5 cases in our country yet, but it is something that we need to watch out for.
And Dr. Tan, Dr. Anthony Fauci warned that there might be a resurgence of cases in the US in the autumn. And while South Korea seems to be following the trends that the US and the UK are seeing, so should South Korea be worried as well about a possible resurgence?
Of course. So the fall winter season, of course, is when we see peaks of respiratory infectious diseases. Certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, that's when we experienced the Delta wave and then the Omicron wave. And so there is a high chance that we will have another surge this winter season. But I should note that it may come earlier. We may have a surge in the summer because there are variants that are emerging all the time. If we remember, in India, their biggest Delta surge occurred in the spring-summer timeframe. And so I think this is something that we need to be very, very careful about. And that's why I'm concerned about our testing. If we do not test, the data streams from our testing are not as reliable. And so it's hard for us to know what exactly is going on. But I'm glad that we do have this on the radar in terms of a next surge, emerging surge that might happen.
I think it's safe to say, I think we shouldn't be too lax, even with the measures that are being lifted soon. Dr. Tan, as always, thank you very much for your insights, and we're looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
In his latest interview with CNN, Ukraine's president has insisted his country will not give up territory in the eastern part of his country to end its war with Russia. This comes as Ukraine says its remaining soldiers in the city of Mariupol will continue to fight Moscow's armed forces. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stressed that Ukraine is not willing to give up territory in the eastern part of the country to put an end to the ongoing war with Russia. In an interview with CNN, Zelenskyy underscored the fact that Ukrainian forces are prepared to fight Moscow's military in the Donbas region in a battle he describes that could impact the course of the entire war. He also explained that he has no trust in the Russian military or the Russian leadership, and said he wants U.S. President Joe Biden to visit his country to see the situation. Against this backdrop, Moscow says its military has destroyed an ammunition factory near Ukraine's capital with high-precision air-launched missiles. Meanwhile, at least 5 people were killed and 20 others injured in Kharkiv after a Russian missile attack on Ukraine's second-largest city. Ukraine's prime minister stressed that the country's remaining forces in the southern port city of Mariupol are still fighting.
No, city still is not fallen. There is still our military forces, our soldiers, so they will fight till the end. And as for now, they still are in Mariupol.
The Russian military had given the remaining Ukrainian soldiers a deadline to lay down their arms and surrender, which passed without any sign of compliance by Ukraine's forces. Moscow then warned that all those who continued the resistance would be destroyed. The city has seen some of the fiercest fighting and worst civilian suffering since Russia's invasion, with at least 21,000 people killed, according to Ukrainian estimates. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Pope Francis on Sunday implicitly criticized Russia for dragging Ukraine into a cruel and senseless conflict as he marked what he called an Easter of war. Speaking to about 100,000 people in St. Peter's Square for the Easter Sunday Mass, the Pope dedicated much of the message to Ukraine, urging leaders to strive for peace. While the 85-year-old did not mention Russia by name, he thanked those who had taken in refugees from Ukraine, most of whom had gone to Poland. Sunday's event marked the first time the public have been allowed into the square to hear the Easter address following 2+ years of COVID-19 restrictions.
Now, in its upcoming forecast this Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund is going to downgrade this year's economic growth projections for most countries because of the war in Ukraine, pushing up food and energy prices. Now, speaking in Washington, the IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, said last week that while most countries will still see positive growth, earlier projections will be downgraded for 143 countries. Now, these countries represent 86% of global productions. Now, Georgieva noted that inflation right now in developed countries is the highest it's been in 40 years and will likely last longer than initially forecast. Now, without help, she said, some countries could face hunger, poverty, and social unrest. Now, this week is South Korea's Trauma Week, where mental health experts and survivors of national tragedies gathered to raise awareness on how to treat trauma. Now, our Yoon met some of those traumatized by South Korea's worst disasters and looks at what is being done to help them recover.
Every day on the news, we see tragic events wreaking havoc around the world. But what we don't see are the lasting effects on the people affected. Many develop trauma. Trauma is an emotional response to experiencing or witnessing a life-threatening event. While most people recover quite quickly with the help of friends and family, some develop post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Many people suffering from PTSD develop other mental health problems like depression or anxiety.
저는 산풍 생존자입니다라는 책을 쓴 작가 산만 언니입니다.
27 years ago, where I'm walking right now, South Korea saw its deadliest building collapse.
1995년 6월 29일이었고요. 한 저녁 6시 정도였어요. 그러니까 당시에 굉장히 더웠어요. 굉장히 더웠고 에어컨이 고장이 났고 건물 여러 군데 붕괴 조짐이 있다. 그래서 저는 당시 지하 1층에 있었고 커다란 폭발음이 들렸을 때 저는 무너진 동에 있었는데 누가 불러가지고 그쪽으로 가는 도중에 뒤에서 건물이 무너졌어요. 저는 이제 뒤쪽을 날아오는 돌의 파편에 맞았거든요.
Lee Sun-min was 20 years old at the time. Now she's 47, and a new apartment complex has been built where Sampoong department store used to stand. But she's still trapped in that summer day of 1995.
남들은 그 20대 그 너무 행복하고 막 청춘의 시간들인데 저는 그때를 떠올리고 싶지도 않아요. 진짜로. 너무 힘들어서. 그러니까 뭐 불면증 그러니까 그때 그 당시에 겪었던 모든 그러니까 성격장애 스펙트럼 유형까지 다 보였고 30살 돼서까지도 죽고 싶었어요. 그러니까 뭐만 하다가 안 되면 그냥 죽어버리지 이걸 왜 살지? 그 사람들 그렇게 간단하게 죽는데.
Another national tragedy is the sinking of the Seoul Ferry, South Korea's worst maritime disaster in modern history. A ship carrying 476 passengers from Incheon to Jeju Island sank. More than 300 people died. I talked to a mother who lost her son in this tragedy. 8 years have passed and she still suffers from the trauma.
저를 예로 들자고 하면 처음에는 샤워도 못했어요. 주방에서 음식 같은 거 할 때도 너무너무 힘들고 주저앉아서 울기도 하고 아무것도 못하는 상태가 되었었고요. 뭐 의학적으로 뭐 불면이라든지 불안, 우울, 뭐 긴장감, 막 예민함, 막 분노, 막 이거는 여전하게 현재 진행형이거든요. 또 숨을 잘 못 쉰다든가 뭐 머리 아픈 거는 늘상 진통제를 달고 있고요.
It was this incident that stirred a movement in Korea. Authorities recognize that national tragedies spur trauma and that trauma caused by the nation should be treated by the nation. That's why in 2018, the Ministry of Health and Welfare launched the National Center for Disaster Trauma.
Our main focus is treating disasters because they can't be handled by a single organization or local government. They require comprehensive aid. Before our center was established, many psychiatrists and private organizations volunteered to go to the front lines and provide counseling. But they realized this wasn't a job they could do alone. They called for a national center to oversee the site and provide a wide range of resources.
The center's main mission is to help survivors become more resilient. It also raises awareness on the importance of treating trauma. That's why the center has designated a week in April as Trauma Week, where symposiums and online seminars are held for mental health professionals and survivors to come together and talk about their trauma and how it can be treated.
Trauma is quite prevalent. 8 out of 10 people experience trauma once in their life. Some experience it twice. While we can't stop these disasters or horrible incidents from happening, what we can do is help people with trauma recover from it. That's what we want to promote during this Trauma Treatment Week.
A psychiatrist specializing in trauma and stress studies said the nation's decision to handle trauma was a step in the right direction.
Trauma can lead to societal damage. It's not something that just affects survivors and their families. It's beneficial for the nation to actively help survivors recover so they can come back to society.
It's not just survivors of national tragedies that require help from the nation. It's also those who work on the front lines, like firefighters. Just a few days ago, a wildfire broke out right here, blazing through 347 hectares worth of land. It took a total of 48 hours to completely get rid of the flames. This firefighter has been on the special rescue team at the fire service headquarters in Gyeongsangbuk-do province for more than 7 years. He said every day, he and his colleagues are exposed to trauma.
트라우마라고 할 게 뭐 매 순간 이 트라우마를 만들 수 있는 상황이라고 생각하거든요. 매 순간 힘든데 제가 자주 다니는 길 중에 한 그 길목에 총 4분의 소사자가 발생한 현장이 있었습니다. 거기는 제 여동생 또래의 학생 3명과 그 운전자는 학원 선생님이셨는데 그 현장을 지나갈 때마다 항상 그때의 기억이 떠오르고 또 제가 또 주변 사람들 내 가족이 그럴 수도 있고 내 지인이 그럴 수도 있다는 생각이 항상 좀 머리에 있어가지고 항상 조심하라고 말.
That's why local governments are fueling efforts to expand the scope of who should be treated for trauma. One such effort can be seen in Yeongju City in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, which has the world's biggest forest therapy center. Here, visitors can find emotional wellness through various healing programs. Studies found that depression levels among those who tried forest therapy fell to a third of previous levels. I feel so relaxed right now. I love the fact that I can enjoy the cool breeze and look out into the woods. But because I've never experienced trauma myself, I had to ask those with trauma what they think is the best way to treat it.
그런데 나랑 비슷한 걸 겪은 사람들을 일부러라도 만나야 돼요. 나라에서라도 통장이라도 찾아와서 자꾸 불러내서 만나게 하고 얘기하게 해야 돼요. 왜냐하면 그러는 과정에서 치유가 되거든요. 그러니까 사람은 사람을 통해서 치유가 돼요. 어쩔 수 없어요.
좀 용기를 내주셨으면 한 번이라도 나 너무 힘들어, 나 좀 도와줘 이런 말씀을 하실 수 있으면 좋을 것 같고요.
항상 현장을 갔다 와서 말로 풀고 있기 때문에 대화를 많이 해야 된다고 생각합니다. 그래야지 이제 몰랐던 부분도 같이 풀어나갈 수 있고 또 대화도 하고 동료들하고 같이 몸을 부딪히면서 운동하는 게 가장 좋은 치유 방법이지 않을까라는 생각이 듭니다.
As survivors and mental health experts have said, it's all about communication, being a good listener, and not being afraid to talk about trauma. And if you need more help, seek for professional support. 신예은, Arirang News, Yeongju.
It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. It came as little surprise when North Korea claimed on Saturday that it tested a new type of tactical guided weapon, something observers say looks similar to its short-range ballistic missiles first tested in 2019. The South Korean military said that it detected the launch of 2 projectiles on Saturday evening, this following a major holiday in the north marking the 100th anniversary of the birth date of regime founder Kim Il-sung. The so-called Day of the Sun had passed without major provocations or a military parade, contrary to what many had expected. But there have been forecasts that there may be further missile tests or even a nuclear test to come around the anniversary of the establishment of the North Army on April 25th. Today, we discuss the latest developments with Soo Kim, policy analyst at RAND Corporation and former CIA analyst, and Park Won-gon, professor of North Korean studies at Ewha Womon University. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll go with ladies first today. So, Sue, very good evening to you in the US. Now the North initially staged a relatively calm celebration of the Day of the Sun on Friday, and then they shot 2 projectiles that the regime claimed was a test of a new type of tactical guided weapon. Now, what do you make of these developments?
So, I mean, we're not completely out of the woods when it comes to North Korea's, missile and nuclear provocations. I think that the Day of the Sun is more reserved to honor and to glorify the founder, Kim Il-sung, especially at a time when North Korea is stretched really thin due to COVID-19 measures and of course, just the country's isolated style. As you said, there were experts who had predicted that perhaps North Korea would be showing, a new display of weapons yesterday. But there's another celebration, which is April 25th, the founding anniversary for the KPA, which might be a better occasion for North Korea to display this new technology. I do think that the test that we saw recently is a prelude to what's to come, which is, of course, a tactical nuclear weapons delivery system. So it's a prelude, and I also think that given the indications that we've seen over the past few months with the North Koreans ramping up its missile testing, it's only a matter of when, I would say, that we would see a greater display of North Korean military aggressiveness.
And Won-gon, let's compare the North's 110th Day of the Sun with the 100th anniversary 10 years ago, when the North did hold rather large military parades and Chairman Kim Jong-un's first public speech as well. Why do you think this year they kept the event quite low-key, and what did you make of the 2 projectile launches the next evening?
Well, North Korea, they proclaimed that they are going to commemorate this year as the victory of a revolution. Of course, the most important events are Kim Jong-un's 8th birthday on February 16th and Kim Il-sung's 110th birthday. But I think North Korea will celebrate all year long. Yes, I agree with Soo Kim that there is a possibility that they're going to have a big military parade this coming 19th anniversary of the founding of the Revolutionary Army. And there is a possibility that they are going to show their very recent developed missiles, such as KN-23, 24, 25, and some modified versions, hypersonic missiles, long-range cruise missiles, and of course the ICBM Hwasong-17, allegedly, and SLBM. And also, it seems to be this recent projectile they had launched this last Saturday, 16th. I think there are a couple of meanings. First, they are going to back to the so-called routinization of the provocations, and because they did not specify threats. Instead, they are saying that it's just for their self-defense, and they're trying to enhance their deterrence capability. It reminds me that Kim Yo-jong, of course, Kim Jong-un's sister's statement the last year's September, she mentioned about the so-called double standards and tried to justify their illegal nuclear development. And second meaning is they are explicitly showing their intention to develop their tactical nuclear missiles, and no longer North Korea wanted to hide their intention. And Kim Jong-un very clearly mentioned that his intention to develop further about this tactical nuclear weapon, which is a very serious threat to South Korea.
And Won-gon, instead of flashing the list of new weaponry that you mentioned or launching another missile on the Day of the Sun itself, regime leader Kim Jong-un, he attended a completion ceremony of a modern high-rise apartment, and actually one of the homes was gifted to the very famous North Korean news anchor Lee Chun-yu. Now, what do you think was the purpose of this rather odd PR move? That's to you, Won-gon.
All right. Yes, of course, Korea is trying to support.
Sorry, we seem to be experiencing a little audio trouble. Let's go back to you. Let's get back to you, Won-gon, in a bit. And Sue, a question to you. This year's Day of the Sun, it did pass rather quietly, but then, of course, as you both mentioned, there are predictions that things might be a little different around the 25th, which is the founding day of the People's Army, and there might be some armed provocations then. So what are you expecting to see from this upcoming event?
So if we didn't see what we expected to see, on the 15th, and we're waiting until the 25th to see it, we're talking about, again, a display of advanced technology that indicates that the North Korean military has shown and followed through on its determination to improve its to advance its weapons capabilities, including, of course, the tactical nuclear weapons. We also have to keep in mind that this is, after, in just a few weeks, we will be seeing a new South Korean leadership. So North Korea would also want to keep that in mind, and also keep in mind what President-elect Yoon said about the policy towards North Korea, enhancing and strengthening the alliance, and where South Korea is actually going to be positioned vis-a-vis inter-Korean relations. So there are several atmospherics, I would say, that North Korea would keep in mind. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's going to be, the decisions are not contingent upon these, but it follows through with what Kim Jong-un had been planning for years. But I think that this might be an opportune time for Kim Jong-un to, since the North Koreans have essentially taken steps to, abolish the moratorium that it had placed. I think it's just, we have to see how much and how aggressive Kim Jong-un wants to take this, because he's also probably looking to see how the incoming government is going to respond to this.
And now, Wongon, let's get back to you. I think we've got our audio back. And well, it's back to the question about the rather strange PR move concerning the North Korean news anchor Lee Chun-hee. So instead of staging a huge military parade or some kind of provocation on the Day of the Sun, Wongon, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un actually went to the completion ceremony of a high-rise apartment, upon which he gifted a luxurious home to the North Korean news anchor. What did you make of this move? What do you think it really, what was the intention of holding that event?
Well, I think Kim Jong-un is definitely wanted to consolidate his domestic support, especially among his core followers. And we are seeing that North Korea withdrew this moratorium of the ICBM and nuclear test by launching Hwasong 17 in March 24th. And definitely North Korea is trying to already get started to a very serious confrontation against South Korea and United States. And for that purpose, definitely Kim Jong-un needs to back up his very aggressive policy domestically. So I think they are seeing some kind of two measures recently. You just mentioned they give some material incentive to civilians, and also Kim Jong-un has promoted some military generals. And we are seeing that North Korea faced so-called triple distress and economic sanction, COVID-19, and natural disaster. And definitely Kim Jong-un need to consolidate his power for the upcoming more serious confrontation with South Korea and United States.
And Sue, you both mentioned this, but well, as South Korea and the US look set to deepen their security alliance, do you think there is a danger that North Korea is getting ready to scale up its provocations, particularly with the incoming government in the South?
So, I mean, North Korea has, I would say, it's never given up the intent to basically proliferate and to expand its capabilities. But recent indications, of course, with Kim Yo-jong saying that North Korea is actually opposed to war, but would not hesitate to use its nuclear weapons if provoked or if attacked. We're also seeing activity at Punggye-ri, where we're seeing indications that they might be trying to resume the operations of the facilities. So these are, I would say, these tactical changes that confirm and I guess in some ways sort of assure us that our assumptions might be correct. So I think the signs are there, but again, Kim Jong-un knows that the Yoon administration is not going to be it's not going to be similar to the responses that it's seen from the Moon Jae-in administration. So he wants to, of course, I think, take a tough approach, but given the conditions of North Korea, the domestic situation, as well as just not knowing how firmly and how committed the Yoon administration is actually going to be from its rhetoric to its actions, I think Kim Jong-un is also going to want to see how much he can get away with and what kind of response he's going to see from South Korea, but also from the United States as well, because I think that would also test the resolve of the alliance and how much further it could drive a wedge between the two countries under the new administration.
And now, Won-gun, US President Joe Biden is expected to visit Japan at the end of the end of next month to attend the Quad Summit. And this raises the possibility that the South Korea-U.S. summit could be held then as well. Now, how do you see the chances of this happening?
I think there is a very high chance to happen to meet both South Korea and United States president and have a summit. Because we have experienced that, just 5 hours to see the result of the presidential election here in Korea, the President Biden called the president-elect, the Yoon Suk-yeol, and it represents that U.S. has a kind of wanted to have a far better and even a strengthened relationship with South Korea, because of course South Korea is one of the most important allies for the U.S., especially. For United States, definitely they need South Korea's very strong cooperation to balance against China. So unlike the incumbent Moon Jae-in government, the upcoming Yoon Suk-yeol government already showed their intention, a very clear intention to enhance South Korea and United States alliance. And we were seeing that the Yoon Suk-yeol president-elect Yoon Suk-yeol sent a special envoy group to the United States. But overall, South Korea should be more careful. Yes, I definitely agree to enhance this relationship with the United States. But at the same time, South Korea has a little bit different priority. I just mentioned that the United States wanted to have a top priority to balance against China. But for the South Korea, the most urgent mission is to deter the North Korean aggression and denuclearization of North Korea. So, of course, South Korea is not that easy to have a fully side with the United States because of their various reasons. So I think it's not that easy to have just simply strengthen the relationship with the state.
I see. And Sue, how do you see the alliance between Seoul and Washington evolving under incoming President Yoon and US President Biden? Do you think their focus will perhaps broaden from North Korea?
So that's, I think, the Yoon administration's aspirations, as indicated through some of the writings that we've seen from President-elect Yoon, as well as the people that he's appointed to his cabinet. But I do think that, it's a new administration. Domestically, he also needs to consider strengthening his mandate vis-a-vis the South Korean public, but also within his own party. So it will take time for Seoul to actually reach that point where he can actually basically follow through the words with actions. So I think from the perspective of the United States, there needs to be, I think, a bit of a waiting time to give the Yoon administration some opportunity to strengthen the position domestically, so that if South Korea truly wants to step up into the global pivotal role that the administration has mentioned, what needs to happen is the domestic affairs need to be put in order first. After that, of course, he did say that the North Korean threat is going to be it's the biggest enemy for South Korea. However, the fact that the Yoon administration is emphasizing expanding beyond the North Korean threat should give some assurance, I think, to the United States. It may take South Korea a bit of time to be as unambiguous about its position vis-a-vis United States and China and its competition, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But the fact that there's a willingness there and this desire to step up into a greater role, I think, is optimistic. And it certainly, I think, bodes well for the two countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where we must leave it for today, as we're out of time. But thank you to Soo Kim, policy analyst at Rand Corporation and former CIA analyst, and Park Won-gun, professor of North Korean Studies at Lee Hwa-won University.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, here in Korea, April is Science Month, which means lots of events where ordinary people can learn about science in fun and engaging ways. Now, this April, artists and scientists have teamed up for an exhibition of works that use interactive technology and artificial intelligence to illustrate important ideas in biology and other fields. Now, it's at the Surim Art Center in downtown Seoul. Our Cho Sang-min has more on this.
This piece of cloth is embroidered with small star-shaped circuit boards all across it. Its creators claim the board's LEDs resemble astrocytes, a star-shaped brain cell in our nervous system. The circuits have been sewn using a special thread and with high electric conductivity, and the project is a collaboration between an artist and a scientist.
The fact that the nerve cell that I initially considered secondary to Dr. Nam Min-ho's research was actually a pivotal part of the study struck me as being this project's inspiration.
The features and a lot of the abstract ideas of the nerve cell that microscopes can't pick up seem to have been well illustrated through the artwork. I am excited to see what the general public thinks of it.
This hybrid art and science project is inspired by Shanhai Jing, a renowned text about Chinese myths. Elements from the scripture come alive thanks to the utilization of AI technology. With a snapshot of the QR code on the floor, viewers get a more hands-on experience of the artwork through Instagram. Other notable projects also focus on infusing artistic values with topics that pique the interests of scientists. One of the other artworks is inspired by the famous study that discovered how one marine snail transfers its memories to another. This is the 4th edition of the annual event that first began in 2019 and is run by the Korea Institute of Science and Technology and Surim Cultural Foundation. The artworks will be on display free of charge at Surim Art Center in downtown Seoul until the end of April, the month of science. 조 성민, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, for a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning to you guys.
Well, Matthew, let's begin with a story out of the United States, as reports indicate yet another shooting incident has taken place.
That's right. Now, 2 people have died and 9 were injured in Sunday's shooting in Pittsburgh's East Allegheny neighborhood. According to authorities, 8 of the gunshot victims are receiving treatment. Meanwhile, the condition of the 9th victim, allegedly connected to the incident, is unknown. Authorities say as many as 90 rounds were fired during a party at a short-term rental property where some 200 people had gathered. The gunshots caused some of the guests to jump out of windows, resulting in cuts and broken bones. Police believe 2 shooters may have been involved. Moving on to Hong Kong, where security hardliner John Lee looks likely to be the city's new leader. Lee has emerged as Beijing's pick and has secured nominations from more than half of the members of the election committee, who will end up choosing Hong Kong's new chief executive on May 8th. A former deputy prime minister and security chief, Lee played a role in quelling the citywide 2019 anti-government protests. He was also instrumental in implementing the Hong Kong National Security Law, which saw more than 170 public figures in media and politics arrested. Local media outlets noted that Lee's campaign for candidacy in the election, which normally takes a few months, has only taken a few days. The support Lee has received has led many to speculate whether the one country, two systems era is coming to an end. Hate crimes in New York City have increased 76% so far in 2022 compared to the same period last year. The latest data from the New York City Police Department indicates that 194 hate crimes were reported from January 1st to April 10th, an increase of 84 cases. This comes as Mayor Eric Adams rolled out a plan to combat crime in the city, which also includes addressing homelessness. Hate crimes against Asians saw a 32% fall, with 32 cases reported this year compared to 47 in 2022. Analysts, however, say figures reflect the base effect, pointing to a prevalence of anti-Asian crimes before the COVID-19 pandemic. They added that victims in the Asian community also have a lower tendency to report crimes, resulting in lower figures. Crimes targeting Jewish people more than tripled from 28 to 86 cases, whilst offences against black people doubled from 13 to 26. Proving that love can indeed endure even in wartime, a Russian man has married a Ukrainian woman in Mexico. Russian Semyon Bobrovsky and Ukrainian Darina Sagniuk married at Tijuana City Hall halfway around the world from their home countries. The couple of 3 years had originally lived in Ukraine, eventually fleeing the conflict for Mexico 2 weeks ago in order to apply for refugee status in the U.S. However, U.S. authorities have not allowed Russians to enter the country since the war began, with the only exceptions being those who can prove they have family there or can legally prove their relationship with someone allowed to enter. The newlyweds hope to be able to cross the border into San Diego before making their way to New York to begin a new life there.
Good morning. Spring is in full swing across Korea, and we had some picture-perfect weather over the weekend. But we'll be seeing more clouds than spring sun today, with highs going slightly above seasonal temperatures. Air quality remains bad all day in the capital region and Chungcheong-Namdo province, so please have a face mask that helps to filter fine dust today. Tomorrow looks to be a dusty one as well. Morning temperatures are similar to slightly higher than last Friday. Seoul starting out near 12 degrees, Busan at 14 degrees. Highs will be similar to Sundays, however going up to 20 degrees. Gwangju, Gyeongju will be warm, going up to 24 degrees this afternoon. Meanwhile, eastern regions and Seoul are under a dry weather advisory again. So we do need spring rain to soak the nation, but seems like mainly sunny and dry conditions will stay with us, with wide gaps in readings between lows and highs to continue. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that's going to do it for us on this newscast, but we'll be back again tomorrow for our Tuesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thank you ever so much for starting your week with us. Have a lovely day wherever you are. Goodbye.